Hey guys, tonight we're not just strolling through ancient Egypt, we're slipping into sandals, donning a golden headdress, and getting promoted to Pharaoh. Sounds glamorous, right? Divine power, adoring crowds, pyramids built in your honour. Well, hold on to your crook and flail. Because being a pharaoh wasn't just waving from a chariot and lounging in gold-dipped bathtubs. It was pressure, it was politics, and it was a full-time job that followed you into the afterlife, literally. So before you get too comfortable thinking about reclining on silk cushions while eating honey-drenched figs, let's dig into what it really meant to be the so-called living god of the Nile. Let's be honest. No one becomes pharaoh because they want a quiet life. You were considered divine, an actual god in human form. That sounds flattering until you realise that gods aren't allowed to screw up, ever. You were expected to maintain Ma'at, cosmic balance. If a flood was too high, too low, if the crops failed, if someone sneezed funny in Memphis, it was your fault. That's a lot of spiritual paperwork. Sure, you had palaces, temples, statues taller than most modern buildings, but you also had thousands of people watching your every move. Everything you did was symbolic. Your morning routine, ritualized. Your meals, sacred. Your wardrobe, curated by high priests who probably hadn't smiled since the Old Kingdom. And if you ever lost your aura of control, you weren't just unpopular, you were dangerous. To the state, to the cosmos. Now let's talk about that divine PR campaign you had to maintain. As Pharaoh, you didn't just rule Egypt. You were supposed to be Horus incarnate, the falcon god, the bridge between humans and gods, which sounds impressive, but also meant that every single festival, offering, ceremony, moon phase and calendar alignment required your involvement, or at least your face carved on something. Even your name wasn't yours. You had 5 names. One for being king of Upper Egypt, one for Lower Egypt, one proclaiming your divine nature, one to say you smite enemies, and one that basically screamed, "I am the sun." It's like having 5 job titles and being expected to answer every time someone shouts them all at once. Speaking of enemies, pharaohs weren't exactly surrounded by trustworthy BFFs. Court life was a snake pit in linen kilts. Between advisors, generals, priests, viziers, scribes, foreign spies, ambitious sons, and your cousin trying to stage a coup over breakfast, you were constantly playing 4D political chess, and if you showed weakness, that was your head on a lotus platter. Of course you had soldiers, lots of them, elite guards with bronze weapons and impeccable eyeliner. But loyalty was a tricky thing. One drought, one grain shortage, one bad omen, and your golden army might suddenly start worshipping someone else, like your ambitious younger brother who happens to claim divine dreams. And don't even think about retirement. Pharaohs didn't retire, they died. But that didn't stop the planning. The moment you put on the crown, someone somewhere started building your tomb. It was like getting handed your dream job and a detailed funeral plan on the same day. Congratulations, you're king. Now pick your coffin colour. Pyramids? Those were for the big shots early on. Later pharaohs went underground, literally. Tombs hidden in cliffs, valleys and booby-trapped passageways filled with curses and crocodile pits. Okay, maybe not crocodile pits, but close. And why? Because grave robbing was a full-time industry. Your jewellery, sarcophagus, even your organs in those fancy jars, none of it was safe. But you know what really kept pharaohs up at night? The afterlife. Ancient Egyptians didn't believe in one neat judgment and a harp. Oh no, you had to navigate a literal underworld with gates, guardians, crocodile-headed demons, a heart scale, and if your soul failed the feather test of Ma'at, you got eaten by a monster called Ammit, who was part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, and all digestive tract. So pharaohs built entire spiritual obstacle courses for themselves, scrolls, amulets, spells and carvings, all to prep for the underworld like it was the ultimate final exam. And gods help you if the scribes made a typo in your Book of the Dead. Oops, we sent him to the crocodile lounge. Our bad. Let's also not forget the fashion. Yes, you looked stunning. Gold pectorals, leopard skin cloaks, turquoise rings, makeup that could kill a man. Literally, it had lead in it. But that image came at a cost. Every wrinkle, every grey hair, every limp was a PR crisis. You had to radiate health and divine vigour, or the priesthood might decide pick the wrong dude. Then there were the love lives, plural. Pharaohs had queens, secondary wives, harems, concubines, and enough romantic drama to make Netflix blush. Love wasn't the goal. Dynasty was. And if your heir didn't work out, scandal, chaos, civil war. Just ask Akhenaten, or Tutankhamun, or Hatshepsut, who wore a beard and declared herself king just to make the system stop glitching. And if you ever doubted your job was 24/7 divine madness, remember this. You couldn't even sneeze without someone assigning spiritual significance to it. A strong gust of wind, portent, a cloud covering the sun, emergency ritual, a comet, full-blown apocalypse. So yeah, being Pharaoh, iconic, powerful, drenched in incense and praise, but also lonely, exhausting, and steeped in the kind of pressure that makes modern CEOs look like toddlers playing SimCity. Still think you could handle it? Next up, let's dive into the divine dating scene. What it meant to love, marry, and bed like a god king in ancient Egypt. Because when your heart is supposed to mirror cosmic balance, and your bedroom is under constant priestly observation, let's just say, romance isn't simple. Because now that you're Pharaoh, the gods expect you not just to lead, but to breed. Welcome to the divine dating game of ancient Egypt. Now, to the outsider, it might seem like pharaohs had it made in the love department. Lavish palaces, luxurious silk sheets, a parade of concubines, and royal matchmakers treating your romantic prospects like a sacred Tinder scroll. But let's not get too dreamy. Because beneath the rose-scented baths and moonlit garden strolls, Egyptian royal romance was more political chessboard than rom-com with hieroglyphs. See, for pharaohs, love was never just love. It was legacy, dynasty, cosmic duty. You didn't swipe right on a priestess because you had a nice chat at a banquet. You married a royal cousin to solidify your divine bloodline, or a foreign princess to seal a treaty, or your own sister. Yes, sister. Because nothing says unbroken divine lineage like keeping it all disturbingly in the family. Now, before you clutch your linen robes in horror, remember, ancient Egyptian society believed pharaohs were literal gods, and gods, in their myths, married their sisters all the time. Isis and Osiris, Nut and Geb. It wasn't taboo, it was tradition. The divine family tree didn't branch. It circled like a sacred snake. And so the pharaoh's queen wasn't just a wife. She was a high priestess, a co-ruler, a living goddess. She performed temple rituals, protected your car, life force, and occasionally got top billing in her own statuary. Some queens like Nefertiti and Hatshepsut even ruled outright. Others, like Tyre, whispered power behind carved doors and sealed scrolls. But let's not pretend it was all roses and honey cakes. Love in the royal palace came with spies, rivalries, jealousy, and the ever-present risk of being politically unseated by a newer, shinier marriage alliance. If your queen couldn't produce a male heir, well, time to expand the harem. And oh, the harem. Forget the Hollywood fantasy of golden cages and silk pillows. Royal harems in Egypt were sprawling institutions, part daycare, part political hostage zone, part matchmaking factory. They housed wives, concubines, princesses, entertainers, foreign noblewomen, and their massive entourage of tutors, guards, scribes, and servants. It was less sexy retreat and more human filing cabinet. But it was powerful. A smart concubine could rise to queen. A forgotten one could become the mother of the next king. And a scheming one? She could orchestrate palace coups from her perfume chambers with nothing but gossip and eyeliner. Just ask Ramses III. One of his wives led a harem conspiracy so intricate it involved magic spells, court officials, and an attempted murder during a festival parade. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well. Executions, exile, and one of history's messiest trials followed. All over royal jealousy and succession drama. So no, pharaohs didn't just have it easy in love. Their beds were filled with expectation. Their hearts were split between duty and dynasty, and their quietest whispers could echo through eternity if caught by the wrong ears. Even simple romance was a minefield. Public displays of affection weren't forbidden, but they were coded in symbolism. Holding a lotus flower to your queen? That's passion. Sharing a chair in a sculpture? Deep respect. Kissing? Not in public. Leave that to the gods in the temple art. And yet, Egyptians did love. Fiercely. Poets wrote verses about longing that still throb across papyrus scrolls. "My heart is a fish that swims in your scent," one lover wrote. "Your voice makes my limbs drunk," said another. There was passion in the land of the Nile, fiery, elegant, dangerous. Some pharaohs truly adored their queens. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are often depicted nearly equal in scale, sharing divine rays. Ramses II built entire temples to honour his great royal wife, Nefertari, calling her the one for whom the sun shines. And Tutankhamun, for all the drama around his death, was buried alongside tokens of affection from his young queen Ankhesenamun. But here's the twist. Love, for a pharaoh, always came second to order. If romance helped the kingdom, it was nurtured. If it threatened the throne, buried, erased, or worse, immortalized in stone for future generations to whisper about in museum gift shops. So as you lie beneath your gilded canopy tonight, surrounded by luxury and scrolls of destiny, remember, being pharaoh didn't just mean managing floods and taxes. It meant managing hearts. Yours, your queen's, your court's, and the nation's. And speaking of managing, let's talk next about the palace. Because where there's royal love, there's royal architecture. And the home of a god-king was no ordinary bachelor pad. From perfumed corridors to private chambers guarded by leopard skin guards, from murals of conquest to pigeon-filled courtyards, next we explore what it was really like to live inside the pharaoh's palace, where walls had ears, floors had secrets, and the throne, not always as comfy as it looked. And now let's step past the courtyards of romance and right into the sandstone heart of Pharaoh's daily existence. The palace. But don't imagine cosy thrones and tasteful mood lighting. The royal residence of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh wasn't just a home. It was a stage, a fortress, a shrine, and sometimes a very uncomfortable place to take a nap. Let's set the scene. You wake up not to birdsong but to the low chant of priests cleansing the dawn. Your personal servants are already at your side, offering scented oils, fresh linen robes, and a golden mirror to check for divine-level bedhead. And before you've even had a sip of barley beer or honeyed bread, your vizier is at the door holding 3 scrolls, a political crisis, and a reminder that the High Priest of Amun still wants that new temple wing finished yesterday. You live in the palace of millions of years. Yes, that's an actual name. Pharaohs didn't do modest. Your palace was likely made of mud brick, but don't let that fool you. The interiors were astonishing. Painted walls showing you smiting enemies with improbable muscle tone, ceilings painted with stars, marble columns in lotus and papyrus motifs, incense in every hallway, and floors tiled with scenes of ducks, lilies and Nile gods casually floating round your feet. But as majestic as it sounds, the palace wasn't your private sanctuary. Privacy? Laughable! There were servants everywhere. Attendants, fan-bearers, scribes, cooks, guards, priests, eunuchs, concubines, gardeners, musicians, and at least one guy whose entire job was to carry your stool when you travelled. Your bedroom had more traffic than a Giza marketplace. Even your bathroom breaks weren't safe from watchful eyes. Royal bladders were considered state business. And let's not forget the guard animals. Yes, pharaohs kept exotic pets. Lions, baboons, cheetahs. They were symbols of power and divine control over chaos. But they also occasionally stole dinner or mauled a particularly nervous diplomat. Risky decor choice, really. Still, the palace had its moments of splendour. Your throne room, absolutely dazzling. Golden furniture inlaid with ivory and lapis, a roof high enough to make gods jealous. And that throne wasn't just for sitting. It was for declaring law, receiving tribute, and making generals tremble. Some pharaohs had thrones shaped like lions or flanked by winged cobras. Not exactly ergonomic, but it sent a message. And speaking of messages, as everything in the palace spoke of your divine power, the colours weren't chosen for fashion. Red was for vitality and destruction, blue for the Nile and the heavens, green meant rebirth, gold meant divine, and you better believe there was gold everywhere. On doors, cups, bedposts, sandals, even the toilet box. But the palace wasn't just a place for royal flexing. It was a nerve centre, a beating bureaucratic heart. Every day, scribes gathered in chambers like caffeinated beetles, churning out scrolls, lists, decrees, and receipts for grain deliveries. Messengers came from Thebes, Memphis, and even distant Nubia, with dispatches tied in wax and linen. And let's not forget the spies. Oh yes, your palace was full of whispers. The high priest of Ptah might be bribing your chamberlain. Your sister's nurse might be feeding scrolls to a rival court. Even your favourite juggler could be slipping coded messages into the date cakes. That's why every pharaoh had a private network of informants, a whisper web of loyal servants, secret priests, and occasionally a nosy cat or two. But here's the part no one talks about. It was lonely. Even surrounded by servants, you were untouchable. Literally. If someone touched your sacred body without permission, they could be executed. You couldn't weep in front of others, laugh too loudly, or trip over your sandals. You had to be perfect, always. Divine composure wasn't just expected, it was enforced. And if you did slip, you didn't just lose face, you risked divine imbalance. A sneeze during a royal ritual could cause panic. A bad dream might require an entire night of temple offerings. One pharaoh reportedly lost favour after tripping on a sacred step, and a festival was cancelled. Still, the palace held beauty. Gardens with sacred ponds full of lilies and fat golden fish. Courtyards where musicians played love songs under fig trees. Storerooms filled with honey, wine, cinnamon, and scrolls about constellations, and secret balconies where, once in a while, the pharaoh could just breathe. But always duty called. A feast? You had to bless it. a temple dedication, you were expected to appear, glowing and shaved and probably holding a crook. Even naps were scheduled, because divine rest had to occur between certain hours or risk angering the calendar gods. Yes, even sleep was on a spreadsheet. So what was it really like inside a pharaoh's palace? It was magnificent, imposing, sacred. But it was also exhausting, watchful, heavy with pressure, like ruling from inside a golden fishbowl, with the entire empire pressing its nose to the glass. And while the walls glittered and the ceiling sparkled with stars, it wasn't just a home, it was a performance, one you never stopped giving. Next, let's talk about rituals. Because when you're pharaoh, nothing is normal. Not your breakfast, not your bath, not even how you wash your hands. From sunrise ceremonies to midnight offerings, we're diving into the obsessive, spiritual, and sometimes downright bizarre world of daily rituals that rule the pharaoh's every breath. So you've managed the drama of divine dating and survived a day in your palace without being poisoned or tripping on a gold-plated sandal. Bravo. But now comes the part no pharaoh ever truly escaped. Rituals. Because when you're the living embodiment of Horus, ruler of the two lands, heir of Ra, and part-time sun god impersonator, brushing your teeth in the morning is no simple matter. It's a cosmic event. Let's start at sunrise, because you don't just wake up. You re-emerge from the underworld, symbolically reborn with the rising sun. Your personal chamber is aligned with the east so that the sun's first light hits your golden face. It's not for selfies, it's spiritual calibration. Immediately the ritual begins. Your body is cleansed not with water, but with Nile water blessed by priests and infused with lotus oil. Then comes the anointing of the body with sacred oils, myrrh, frankincense, and something called the oil of joy, which frankly sounds like the name of an ancient Egyptian boy band. You're then dressed by high-ranking priests, not servants. They don't just hand you a robe, they recite prayers over every garment. The white linen tunic symbolizes purity. The leopard skin sash, yes, literal leopard, channels the power of the Sem priest. Your crown? That's not a fashion choice. It's a magical conduit. You might wear the white crown of Upper Egypt, the red crown of Lower Egypt, or the combo deal double crown, which looks like a bowling pin had a baby with a megaphone. Even your jewellery is charged with meaning. The scarab amulet on your chest symbolizes rebirth. The Eye of Horus pendant wards off evil. The scepter in your hand is not just a walking stick. It's a symbol of control over chaos. It's also very pointy, practical and political. Once dressed, you proceed, slowly and solemnly, to the temple. Now, temples in Egypt weren't public hangouts. They were cosmic power stations, designed to mirror the creation of the world. The farther in you went, the holier it got. You, as pharaoh, were among the very few allowed to enter the sanctuary's deepest chamber, where the god statue resided. And guess what? It was your job to wake the god up, no pressure. You, or your priestly stand-in if you were busy smiting someone that day, would open the shrine, clap, burn incense, chant hymns, and offer breakfast to the divine statue. Bread, beer, maybe a roast duck if things were festive. Then you'd wash the statue, anoint it with oils, dress it in tiny divine clothes, and seal it up again. It's like playing sacred dollhouse with a thunder god. You might think that would be it. Breakfast with a god and back to governing? Oh no, your entire day is sequenced with rituals. Mid-morning, you're inspecting a temple project, making sure the columns are aligned with the solstice, and your image is prominently carved on everything. Noon, you receive offerings. Caravans from Nubia arrive bearing gold, ivory and incense. Officials prostrate before you, while someone fans you with ostrich feathers, like your majesty depends on it, which it does. You must radiate divine calm at all times. Sweating is treason. Afternoon? Divination rituals, dream interpretation scrolls, astrological consultations, maybe a quick chariot ride to show off your calves and remind the people Ra picked a king with thighs of thunder. Evening, libation rituals, pouring wine for the ancestors, lighting sacred lamps, petting your sacred cat who is probably a priest in disguise. Maybe overseeing a purification ceremony for that one priest who accidentally dropped a scroll in the temple pool. At night, the rituals continue. Yes, even bedtime is scheduled. You don't just tuck yourself in. You're restoring divine balance through regenerative stasis. Your bed is placed in alignment with certain constellations. You sleep with protective amulets beneath your pillow. If you snore, it's probably transcribed by a nearby scribe and interpreted as an omen. Oh, and dreams, not private. Dreams were divine messages. You had dream interpreters on staff. If you dreamed of a cow standing on a lotus, 3 courtiers would panic, consult a scroll, and possibly sacrifice a duck. It sounds exhausting because it was. Pharaohs didn't take breaks. Their very existence was a constant ceremony. Even eating was sacred. Each ingredient had a ritual reason. You couldn't just snack on grapes. You had to be receiving nourishment blessed by the gods to continue cosmic order. And if you didn't perform all these rituals, if you missed a step, skipped a prayer, it wasn't just a bad day, it was spiritual sabotage. You risked plagues, famines, or worse, bad Nile flooding. Entire temple economies depended on pharaohs staying ritually in sync with the universe. So yes, pharaohs had power. But that power came with a crushing spiritual checklist longer than a pyramid blueprint. If modern CEOs had to live like this, they'd be chanting before email and bathing in moonlight before budget meetings. Still, for all its madness, these rituals gave pharaohs purpose, structure, a sense that every action, every breath, was part of a larger cosmic harmony. It was divine micromanagement, and they believed in it deeply. But tomorrow brings judgment, because no matter how many rituals you performed, how many temples you built, or how many statues you blessed, death still came. And when it did, the real test began, not in gold, but in feathers and hearts. Next, we'll walk you through what really happened when a pharaoh died. Not just the burial, not just the tomb, but the 70-day mummification, the curses, the tomb traps, and the final showdown with the crocodile monster that wants to eat your soul. Yep, it gets weirder. So let's say you've done it. You survived your time as pharaoh. You kissed enough statues, lit enough incense, fathered enough heirs, and nodded solemnly through more rituals than a modern inbox could handle. Your temples are finished. Your priests are pleased. Your people might even be pretending they liked you. And then, one morning Ra decides you've clocked out for good. Congratulations, you're dead. But don't get comfortable. Because for a pharaoh, death isn't an end. It's an entirely new job description. Let's begin with what happens first, mummification. You don't just drop into a tomb and call it a dynasty. No, your body is about to be prepped, purified, stuffed, dried, oiled and wrapped tighter than a paranoid priest's scroll collection. It starts with removing your organs. Your stomach, liver, lungs and intestines are carefully plucked out and placed into little jars, each guarded by a different god with the head of something wild. A jackal, a falcon, a baboon, and a guy who looked suspiciously like an angry teapot. Your heart? That gets special treatment. unless someone panics and throws it away. See, your heart was needed for the final judgment. If your embalmers were having an off day and misplaced it, you were in trouble. No heart, no trial. No trial? Well, we'll get to that. Let's keep going. Next came the drying. Your body's packed with natron salt and left for 40 days in a kind of spiritual slow cooker. Every wrinkle, every pore, every orifice, stuffed. You're turning from pharaoh to pharaoh jerky. Then your body is washed in perfumed water, coated in oils and wrapped in linen, hundreds of meters of it. You're layered tighter than a nobleman's tax report. Amulets are slipped in between layers, scarabs, ankhs, eyes of Horus, miniature gods, and possibly the ancient equivalent of an emotional support cobra. Once you're mummified and painted, you get sealed in nested coffins. One, then another, then sometimes up to 5, until you're basically Russian pharaoh dolls. Finally, you're placed into a sarcophagus, carved from granite and dropped into the most elaborate escape room in history. Your tomb. Let's talk tombs. These were not just resting places. They were cosmic departure lounges, carefully hidden in cliffs or pyramids, lined with spells, curses, treasures, and enough symbolic food to feed a small kingdom. There were golden thrones, jewel-studded chariots, board games to kill time in the afterlife, even entire model armies made of clay to fight your ghost battles for you. And of course, traps. Oh yes, your tomb was designed to be burglar-proof, false doors, decoy chambers, secret tunnels, maybe even a collapsed hallway or two. Not because you were paranoid, but because you had good reason to be. Ancient Egypt had one of the highest rates of grave robbing in human history. Even your own priests might be tempted. So you're mummified, sealed away, treasure-packed, and probably surrounded by a few very nervous retainers who are expected to follow you into death. Some did willingly, some not so much. And now the real journey begins. You awaken in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. It's not hell, it's not heaven. It's the most complicated obstacle course ever invented, with rivers of fire, walls of knives, giant serpents, murderous hippos, and gods that would make a Lovecraftian horror artist flinch. Your soul is split into parts. The bar, which flutters like a bird. The car, which needs food offerings to stay strong. The Ak, your immortal essence. All three must survive this bizarre commute to get you to the Hall of Two Truths, where your fate will be sealed. And what happens in this hall? Judgment. Your heart is placed on a scale opposite a feather, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and balance. If your heart is lighter than the feather, congrats. You get eternal paradise. Fishing, feasting and farming in the fields of reeds, basically the Nile on easy mode. But if your heart is heavier, filled with lies, cruelty, cowardice, enter Amut. She's part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. All appetite. She doesn't scold you. She doesn't banish you. She eats your soul like it's the last bread roll at a royal banquet. You are erased. No afterlife. No legacy. Just divine indigestion. Which is why you made sure your priest left scrolls with the correct Book of the Dead spells in your tomb. That's your script for navigating the underworld. Get one word wrong, and you could end up stuck in a pit of fire or turned into a plant forever. And while that sounds terrifying, remember, pharaohs took this seriously. Tomb building began almost the moment you took the throne. Some kings like Seti I had tombs so elaborate that modern archaeologists still get lost inside them. Others, like poor Tutankhamun, died so young his tomb looked like a divine storage closet. Still, for all the terror and traps, this wasn't fear. This was hope. The belief that death wasn't an end, but a transformation. You didn't just die, you leveled up. Pharaohs wanted to become gods in death, to ascend into the sky and sail with Ra in the solar bark through the night sky, battling chaos each evening so the sun could rise again. Yes, pharaohs literally fought cosmic serpents in space as their post-retirement gig. So the next time you see a golden sarcophagus in a museum, know this. That wasn't just a coffin. It was a battle suit, a passport, a lifeboat to the stars. And pharaohs, they weren't just kings, they were eternal travellers. But before you pack up your soul and head off into cosmic combat, we're not quite done. Because if there's one thing pharaohs couldn't escape, not in life, not in death, it was politics. And in the next story, we're cracking open the scrolls and secrets of Pharaoh's court, a place where power whispered through silk curtains, betrayal came wrapped in compliments, and loyalty was just one dropped offering away from treason. If you thought mummification, cosmic judgment, and soul-eating crocodiles were stressful, you clearly haven't met Pharaoh's inner circle. Because long before your mummy was chilling in a gold-lined tomb, you had to survive the deadliest challenge of all, the royal court. Now let's get one thing clear. Pharaoh's court was no open-concept living space where people dropped by with fresh figs and friendly advice. It was a political jungle, a perfume-scented, jewel-draped, soft-spoken snake pit, where every compliment had a blade tucked behind it. You didn't just rule Egypt, you navigated it. Imagine waking up each morning to 30 of the smartest, most ambitious, most well-manicured people in the kingdom, all pretending they love you, and secretly hoping you drop dead so their cousin can ascend the throne. That's court life. At the top of this royal food chain were the viziers. Think of them as ancient Egypt's prime ministers. They handled justice, infrastructure, taxation, and often did the actual governing while you made divine appearances. A good vizier was worth his weight in gold. A bad one could quietly funnel grain to his brother's estate until half the Nile Delta belonged to his dog. And they always smiled. That was the trick. Next were the priests, specifically the high priests of major temples like Hamun, Ra or Ptah. These weren't just religious leaders, they were kingmakers. Some temples were so rich they had their own armies and land holdings that rivaled the crown's. You wanted them happy. You also wanted them under control. A pharaoh who lost the support of Amun's priesthood could find himself mysteriously ill, or, worse, overwritten by divine prophecy. Then came the scribes. Oh, the scribes. These weren't just note-takers. They were the keepers of knowledge, the creators of law, the masters of math, literature, engineering, and bureaucracy. If a scribe didn't like you, they could quietly misrecord your deeds, bump your tax quota, or make sure your name was spelled just wrong enough that the gods might not recognize it in the afterlife. And of course there were the royal wives and concubines, a literal palace's worth of political chess pieces. Each woman, whether noble-born or a foreign princess, came with her own network, advisors, servants, family ties, and whispered ambitions. One wrong smirk at a banquet and you could find yourself at the centre of a silent coup waged with perfume, eyeliner, and coded hymns. Court wasn't all backstabbing and shade, though. It was also elaborate. You couldn't just walk into a room and say, let's build another obelisk. No, you had to hold a council. Protocol dictated that your every word be documented, blessed, approved, and interpreted by at least 3 different officials. Want to irrigate a new field? That required 7 scrolls, a lunar blessing, and probably a goat. Even how you sat mattered. The height of your throne legs, the direction it faced, the footstool carvings, each one a symbolic slap or nod to the courtiers before you. if you accidentally invited a Nubian envoy to stand on the side reserved for Asiatic ambassadors, congratulations, you just started a diplomatic incident over a chair. And remember, everything you said could and would be engraved. Court artists and scribes were constantly creating reliefs, statues and scrolls showing you looking 10 feet tall, with perfect abs, smiting enemies, or hugging deities. The pressure to look impressive was intense. You could be bloated from too much date wine, but on the temple wall you'd better be the reincarnation of a divine linebacker. Now, every now and then, someone would get a little too ambitious. Whispers would spread. A general begins stockpiling grain just in case. A cousin grows a little too comfortable being referred to as his future grace. Maybe the court magician predicts a great change in the Nile. That's code for you're about to get usurped. If you were wise, you'd host a festival, distract the people, burn incense, sacrifice a few bulls, and quietly have your guards question the magician, not with torture, no, with politeness so exaggerated it bordered on threatening. Such an enlightened dream you had. It would be a shame if someone misinterpreted it. Of course, not all court drama was political. Some of it was just good old-fashioned gossip. Who was seen sneaking into the temple garden after sunset? Who wore their linen kilt too sheer at the solstice ceremony? One scribe wrote an entire poem about a royal baker who flirted with 3 priests and left a trail of bread as evidence. Even pharaohs weren't immune. If you sneezed during a festival, it might be interpreted as a sign that the gods were angry with the military. If your cat ran away, someone would draw omens from the direction it fled. The court was a soap opera, and you were the reluctant star. But here's the secret no carving ever told. You needed them. All of them. The liars, the flatterers, the informants, the faithful. They kept your kingdom running. They built monuments, balanced taxes, maintained rituals, kept the gods happy, and wrote the history books. Without them, you were just a guy in a gold hat with a snake on it. So yes, Pharaoh's court was dangerous. It was exhausting. It was dramatic, layered, and full of sacred nonsense. But it was also thrilling. A delicate dance of power and persuasion. A game of eternal chess played on the stone floor of the Nile. And if you mastered it, you didn't just survive, you became legend. But mastering court life was only half the story. Because even the greatest pharaoh couldn't command the Nile to rise. That required something deeper, something sacred. Next, we turn to the temples, the beating heart of Egypt's spiritual life and the true test of Pharaoh's divine authority. Not just rituals, but architecture, economics, prophecy, and the impossible balance between priesthood and power. Let's step out of the courtroom drama and into something even more sacred, and somehow even more political. Because when you were Pharaoh, temples weren't just places where gods got pampered. They were engines of power, economic fortresses, and billboards for your divine authority. And if you thought temples were just quiet places filled with chanting priests and burning incense, think again. These were the Las Vegas casinos of ancient Egypt, loud, majestic, carefully lit, deeply symbolic, and built to impress both gods and mortals alike. Let's start with the scale. Egyptian temples weren't modest chapels tucked away in a neighbourhood. They were monumental city-sized complexes, with gates that dwarfed people, walls taller than trees, and columns that could hold up the sky. If the sky happened to be painted with stars and stories of your latest military victory. The entry process alone was designed to humble you. Massive pylons carved with images of Pharaoh smiting enemies, long courtyards flanked with sphinxes and statues of yourself in increasingly heroic poses, and an axial design that mimicked the journey from earth to the divine. You didn't just enter a temple, you ascended through it, as if the gods were at the top of a golden escalator. And at the centre of this spiritual megastructure, a tiny dark room. This was the sanctuary, the holiest of holies, where the god statue lived. It was so sacred that only the high priest or pharaoh himself was allowed inside. Sometimes, just for a moment, just to change the god's clothes or offer a little roasted duck. Can't have Ra going hungry. But here's where things get fun, because temples weren't just about gods. They were massive businesses. Temples owned land, stored grain, collected taxes, employed entire cities. They had their own accountants, their own slaves, their own workshops, bakeries and breweries. Some temples were so wealthy they made the royal treasury look like a side hustle. So naturally, as pharaoh, you had to keep a close eye on them. Give them too much freedom, you've basically funded a theocratic shadow government. Rein them in too hard, risk being cursed in 57 languages and seeing your statues gently pushed into the Nile. And don't forget, every major temple had its own internal drama. The priest of Amun in Thebes, hugely influential. The cult of Ra in Heliopolis, ancient and deeply respected. Ptah's temple in Memphis, engineers and builders galore. And don't even get us started on Osiris's funeral raves in Abydos. Each god came with a fan base, a festival schedule, and a specific ritual protocol that made tax audits look simple. And as pharaoh, you were expected to participate in all of it. That meant attending rituals, funding renovations, donating obelisks, and occasionally pretending you didn't hear two rival priesthoods sniping about whether your last offering to one god was a bit too generous. And don't assume you could just write a check and walk away. No, you had to perform. You might have to don a leopard skin and chant hymns, or swing incense in 5 sacred directions, or walk in an awkward sacred pattern that looks suspiciously like you were avoiding invisible snakes. Why? Because the pharaoh wasn't just a donor. You were the intermediary between gods and men. The temples were the stage, and you were the headline act. Did you feel divinely inspired? Irrelevant. You had to look it. Now, it wasn't all ceremonial marathons. Temples could also be your mouthpiece. Want to send a message to the people? Have it carved on a temple wall? Want to brag about your latest conquest? Boom! Relief of you single-handedly defeating 400 Libyans while Ra watches approvingly. Want to rewrite a little history? Easy. Just have your artisans chisel over your predecessor's name and insert yours like they were fixing typos in stone. Of course, that went both ways. If your reign ended poorly, the priest could literally erase you from history. Gone. Wiped. Scraped out like a cosmic clerical error. This wasn't symbolic. It was deeply practical. In Egypt, to be forgotten was a fate worse than death. That's why so many pharaohs poured their wealth into temples, not just to honour the gods, but to immortalise themselves. Every column, every courtyard, every frieze was a giant resume written in limestone. Hire me, Ra, look what I did. And the festivals, oh the festivals. Temples hosted some of the wildest parties in the ancient world. Opet Festival in Thebes, massive parades, the beautiful Festival of the Valley, public feasting, ancestral boat trips and open-air intoxication. You haven't lived until you've seen a statue of Amun being carted down the Nile with incense, music and a priest fainting from heat stroke. You, of course, were expected to attend, lead and smile divinely the entire time, while making sure your enemies weren't using the crowd to sneak a dagger under your ceremonial kilt. And yet, despite all the politics, the egos, the expense, temples were the heartbeat of Egypt. They anchored communities, unified belief, and preserved knowledge. Their walls captured star charts, surgical texts, tax records, and epic poems. They were time machines carved in sandstone. As pharaoh, managing temples was part devotion, part diplomacy, and part keeping up with the divine Joneses. But temples weren't your only concern, because beyond the sacred halls, past the priests and the carved gods, there were other eyes watching you. The common people, the farmers, labourers, scribes, and bakers who made your reign possible, and whose lives told a different story entirely. Next, we descend from the gold and granite to the mud brick streets. We'll explore how pharaohs interacted with the everyday people, how justice was served, how taxes were collected, how propaganda was delivered, and what it really meant to be a god-king in the eyes of the poor. Because absolute power? It's nothing if the people don't believe in it. You've built temples, you've outwitted courtiers, you've even rehearsed your grand entrance for the Opet Festival parade, but none of that matters if the people don't believe in you. Because in ancient Egypt, a pharaoh didn't just rule by force, he ruled by faith. You weren't a king, you were a god, and the average person needed to believe that you were holding the sun in the sky, keeping the Nile on schedule, and gently guiding the cosmic balance of Maat with one divine eyebrow raise. And let's be honest, you weren't always doing a stellar job. Let's start with the farmers, Egypt's lifeblood. They worshipped the Nile not because it was beautiful, but because their crops literally depended on it. Each year they prayed for a good inundation, not too much, not too little, just enough to irrigate their wheat and flax. If the flood failed and the grain yield dropped, they didn't curse the river. They blamed you. After all, you were the son of Ra. Surely you could ask your dad to sprinkle a little more water, right? When times were good, the people praised you with hymns, baked offerings, and quiet admiration. When times were bad, they whispered, and those whispers, they travelled, through markets, temples, and alleys, until one day you heard that someone in a mud brick house 4 villages away carved a tiny drawing of you with donkey ears. That's right. Ancient graffiti was a thing. Still, you couldn't be everywhere. So you had officials, tax collectors, and scribes who made sure the people behaved. Taxes weren't paid in coins. They were paid in goods. Grain, beer, linen, honey, baskets, cattle. If you owed and didn't pay, the taxman might take your donkey, or your roof beams, or your son, now conscripted to help dig irrigation canals in Aswan. And guess what? Those officials, not always subtle. A scribe might show up with a clipboard and 6 guards, demand your entire barley supply and still charge you extra for the sandals he wore on the way there. That wasn't the pharaoh's idea, of course, but to the people it didn't matter. To them the pharaoh was the head of the snake. Which is why, every now and then, you had to show your face. No, not in some massive parade surrounded by gold fans and crocodile handlers. I mean, something smaller. A tour, a judgment, a visit to a province. Something to show you were more than just a silhouette on a temple wall. You might hold open court beneath a sycamore tree while peasants knelt before you and poured out their grievances. My neighbour stole my cow. The priest took my wife. The flood destroyed our grain, and the taxman still came. You'd nod, you'd murmur. You might even issue a royal pardon, or at least look like you were thinking about it. It wasn't justice so much as performance art, but it worked. Because the idea of you, the divine, serene, merciful God-King, mattered more than the exact decisions. If people saw you as the upholder of Maat, they stayed loyal. And loyalty was the most valuable resource in Egypt. Even more than gold. Even more than grain. Now, let's not pretend you were cuddling every worker. The people built your monuments, sure. But voluntary labour in ancient Egypt sometimes meant, don't ask too many questions. Workers were given bread, beer, and rations. They carved limestone under the sun, hauling stones, mixing mortar, and painting tomb scenes for a man they'd never meet up close. But they believed in the system. Your name was spoken during festivals. Songs were written about your greatness. Children were named after your titles. You appeared in their dreams, in their fears, in the low hum of gossip shared over cooking fires. And that meant you had to control the narrative. So you sent out heralds. You built stele, giant stone billboards proclaiming your victories, your generosity, your divine favour. The pharaoh brought back cedar from Lebanon. The pharaoh defeated the vile Cushites. The pharaoh built a canal and now your beer flows twice as fast. A little exaggeration? Sure. But who was going to correct you? History was written in stone, and you controlled the chisel. Still, not all feedback could be managed with monuments. If grain prices spiked, if temple priests got greedy, or if your officials taxed a little too harshly, the people could rise up. Quietly, subtly. A refusal to chant your name at festival. A missing offering. A poorly made statue that looked suspiciously like it had donkey ears again. And if things got really bad? Well, there were cases of entire villages cursing pharaohs, carving spells, burying figurines, chanting invocations at night. The divine son of Ra, undone by a local grandmother with a grudge and a bit of leftover ochre. It happened! So you learned to walk a tightrope, grand enough to seem immortal, human enough to be feared and loved. You didn't need their affection, but you needed their belief. As long as the people kept lighting incense, whispering prayers and pretending you had the sun on speed dial, you were safe. But belief is fragile, and sometimes it wasn't just the farmers you had to win over, it was your own family. Because nothing says relaxing rain like knowing that your brother is eyeing your crown, your eldest son thinks you're past your prime, and your queen might be writing letters to the high priest about dynastic restructuring. Next, we venture into the royal palace. Love, betrayal, succession, and sibling sabotage await as we explore the dramatic, sometimes deadly soap opera of Pharaoh's domestic life. Being Pharaoh wasn't just about temples and taxes, it was also about family. But not in the warm, pass the lentils and tell grandma thank you kind of way. No, the royal family of ancient Egypt was more like a dynastic chessboard, and you were both the king and the piece everyone wanted to replace. Let's start with the basics. As pharaoh, you likely had multiple wives. There was the great royal wife who held the official title, oversaw palace affairs, and often doubled as your sister or half-sister, because keeping the bloodline divine sometimes meant skipping the gene pool entirely and just swimming in a tight little circle. Then there were the secondary wives, noble women, foreign princesses, strategic political gifts from vassal kingdoms. Some came with dowries, others came with veiled threats, and all came with ambition. Because in the world of the pharaoh, bearing an heir wasn't just a maternal milestone, it was a direct path to power. Now imagine a palace filled with dozens of children, multiple wives, concubines, tutors, eunuchs and scribes, each with their own loyalties, plots and favourite gods. Throw in some hormonal teenage princes, a few backstabbing courtiers, and maybe one overly charismatic high priest whispering prophecy in the hallway, and you have the makings of Egypt's most sacred soap opera. You weren't just raising kids, you were raising future rivals. Every child of yours had a potential claim to the throne, especially if they had a mother with connections. And as pharaoh, you couldn't simply name your favourite son and call it a day. Oh no! Succession was a performance, a delicate dance of ceremony, bloodline and approval, not just from the court, but from the gods themselves. This is why pharaohs spent years grooming heirs, naming them co-regents, showcasing them at temple rituals, putting them in charge of provinces, or, if they were particularly unremarkable, shipping them off to become high priests and keeping them divinely busy. But what if you didn't have a son? Or what if your chosen heir suddenly developed a bad case of mysterious death by honey poisoning? That's when things got complicated. Enter royal daughters. Egyptian women, especially noble-born, could wield immense influence. Some became high priestesses, scribes, regents, even pharaohs in their own right. Think Hatshepsut, who started as a great royal wife and ruled as pharaoh for over 20 years, commissioning obelisks and temples while wearing a ceremonial beard like a boss. But don't let the makeup fool you. Palace politics were brutal. Imagine sitting at a feast eating lotus-wrapped duck while two half-brothers exchange riddles that are clearly death threats. Meanwhile, your sister-wife is playing the long game by befriending the kitchen staff, and your most trusted eunuch just slipped you a scroll that says, "The second queen's son dreams of Horus devouring Ra." Translation, he's coming for you. You couldn't just rely on loyalty, you had to play the game. That meant marrying daughters into priestly lines, appointing favoured sons to military posts, and hosting conveniently timed hunting accidents for particularly ambitious nephews. If that sounds cold, remember, the alternative was ending up a name chiselled out of your own obelisk. Even within your private chambers, it never truly stopped. Gossip floated like incense. One mistress was accused of stealing a sacred cat. Another was rumoured to be having moonlit meetings with a visiting envoy. At least one princess was probably writing love poetry about your favourite bodyguard. And the queens, they smiled, they blessed, they dressed in gold and lapis. And some of them, like Tiye, the powerful wife of Amenhotep III, quietly ran entire bureaucracies from behind the curtain. A whisper from the great royal wife could make or break temple appointments, trade deals, or the fate of your third-born son with the nervous twitch. But amid the intrigue, there were moments of real tenderness. Some pharaohs kept letters from their wives, genuine words of affection, longing, humour. Tomb paintings show family scenes, pharaohs playing with children, embracing their wives, watching dancers together during festivals. Amid the politics, there were real bonds, real emotion. But bonds didn't guarantee safety, because when the end came, it didn't matter how many children you had, how beloved you were, or how many temples bore your name. What mattered was who survived you and who wrote your legacy. A loyal heir could ensure you were deified, remembered in hymns, and worshipped for centuries. A vengeful one could erase your name, melt down your statues, and make sure school children learned about that one dark period instead of the golden age you swore you started. Pharaohs weren't just gods on earth, they were human dynamos, constantly balancing divine image with domestic warfare. Because behind every gilded crown was a royal family sharp enough to turn palace walls into political knives. And when the last curtain fell, you hoped they loved you more than they wanted your throne. But that wasn't the end. Because no matter how well you ruled, how carefully you planned, or how many rituals you performed, you had to face one final journey. The underworld, where gods judged your soul, your heart was weighed against a feather, and one misspoken spell could mean eternity being devoured by a crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid named Amit. Next, we descend into the afterlife, a realm of trial, magic, boats, and heart-weighing drama, and explore what pharaohs truly believed awaited them after death. You've ruled. You've built temples, sired heirs, commanded armies, juggled politics, priests and papyrus. And now, your body lies still, wrapped in linen, perfumed with resin, tucked into gold and lapis. Your eyes, once sharp with the weight of a kingdom, are painted wide to face eternity. Because for a pharaoh, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your most important journey yet. Welcome to the afterlife, Egyptian style. Forget clouds and harps. This is the duat, a surreal, sacred underworld sprawling beneath the world of the living. Imagine a realm of molten lakes, serpent guardians, floating coffins, walls that bleed hieroglyphs, and shadowy gods with jackal heads, falcon wings, and crocodile teeth. As Pharaoh, your soul doesn't simply float there. You travel, on a boat, through darkness. Not just any boat, the solar bark, guided by Ra himself, the sun god sailing the eternal night. You're not just a passenger, you're expected to fight beside him. Each night, Ra faces the serpent Apophis, who tries to swallow the sun and plunge the cosmos into chaos. As Pharaoh, you join this celestial battle, spearing the serpent, chanting spells, and ensuring that light rises again for the living. No pressure, but that's just the first leg. You'll need to pass through 12 gates, each one a trial, each one guarded by gods with names longer than the Nile and tempers shorter than your embalming cloth. They'll demand secret words, hand signs, possibly a riddle or two. Luckily you prepared. You had your Book of the Dead, a scroll buried with you, filled with spells, prayers, and illustrations to guide you through. Some versions had over 190 chapters, because in the duat, it pays to have receipts. And then, the big moment. You stand before Osiris, Lord of the Afterlife, calm, regal, wrapped like you, seated on a throne flanked by goddesses and lotus flowers. Before you is a scale. On one side, a single feather, the feather of Maat, goddess of truth and cosmic order. On the other, your heart. Yes, your literal heart. Not your deeds, not your intentions, your heart. Because to the Egyptians, the heart recorded everything. Every kindness, every cruelty, every skipped temple offering or whispered curse at your mother-in-law. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you pass. You ascend to the field of reeds, a heavenly mirror of Egypt, where the Nile flows sweet, the crops are always ripe, and you can stroll forever with those you love beneath golden skies. But if your heart is heavy, well, meet Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. All bad news. She sits by the scale licking her chops. If your heart fails the test, she devours it whole. And your soul? It ceases to exist. No second chances. Just eternal unbeing. It's the Egyptian version of unsubscribe. Of course, as Pharaoh, your tomb wasn't just a crypt. It was an engine, filled with treasure, spells, charms, sacred texts, carved scenes of your greatness. Your sarcophagus alone could weigh tons. You were buried with Shabti figurines to serve you, boats to sail you, food models to feed you, even backup sandals in case eternity got rocky. And the walls of your tomb, they whispered. They told the story of your rule, your victories, your divine nature, but they also offered protection, spells against snakes, demons, and flatulent underworld pigs. Yes, those existed. The tomb was your fortress, your resume, your map. And yet, despite all this grandeur, all the planning, the magic, the gold, you were still at your core a soul, one hoping for peace, for reunion, for rest. Perhaps in the afterlife you walk with your first love again, free from politics and priests. Or maybe you find your favourite servant, the one who always brought extra figs. Maybe you sit beside the Nile, under a fig tree that never wilts, sipping sweet beer and watching the stars that once danced over your palace. Whatever eternity holds, it's quiet now. The scrolls are rolled, the sun has risen, and the gods have judged. You are home. And for us, here in the land of the living, your story ends tonight. You've journeyed with me through the trials, triumphs and turmoils of what it truly meant to be Pharaoh. Not just the glory, but the weight. The crown was never light. The duties never ceased. But now the fire fades, the halls grow silent, and the golden mask rests peacefully over closed eyes. If you stayed awake this long, you deserve a pharaoh's reward. And if you enjoyed this journey, feel free to like the video and subscribe. It helps this little channel sail into more peaceful nights. Now take a deep breath, feel the stillness settle in, and let the soft crackling of the fire guide you gently into sleep. The gods are watching. Good night.